Hello and welcome to The Actor and the Engineer. My name is Paul James. I'm the actor.
And my name's Josh Knapp. I'm the broadcast engineer.
Here we go, Josh.
Yeah, Marvel's back. MCU. I'm excited. Like, what was your excitement level? Like, have you been watching the Disney Plus shows?
Yes and no.
Oh, okay.
So the after credit sequence, I knew about it, sort of, not the sequence, but why it was relevant, but I haven't seen it in the MCU
Shows.
show.
Got it. Well, see, so that my whole thing going into this movie was like, I felt like we've been kind of given this steady stream of Marvel content for the last, well, since WandaVision, essentially. It's just been trickling out over the last year almost. And Black Widow got pushed back from whatever, like April of 2020 to now. And so you can kind of look at it like it was assumed that we would have seen this movie before all of those shows. And so going into this movie, I was kind of like, oh, well, it's probably going to be very similar to the shows. And we'll just kind of, and I kind of got into this groove of watching Marvel TV shows. But then immediately in this movie, you kind of see that it's a different level of production. It's a different level of CGI. The content is a higher level and it's a little bit more codified, at least for me it was. So I was really happy to feel a real MCU movie after 2 years of not seeing one. What, Spider-Man, I guess, was the last one. It was like summer of 2019 was the last Marvel movie.
Well, let me ask you this. So everybody knows there's end credit sequences, blah, blah, blah. No spoilers there until we get there.
Yep.
So we were going to see that before we saw it in Falcon and Winter Soldier.
Yep.
And just to clarify, I've seen all of WandaVision. I'm into episode 5 of Falcon and the Winter Soldier, and I have not seen any of Loki.
Okay.
So,
and Loki just ended.
Yeah, I'll catch up. I got sidetracked in the best way to the Queen's Gambit and then Halston. I couldn't resist Ewan McGregor. So it's their fault that I haven't finished my MCU diet.
Okay. Well, but I don't know what you felt like, but I felt like just the look of this movie, the way that it was shot, and I think the increased budget really helped it out for me. And then the content and the acting was really cool too. And it was something that kind of delineated the difference between a show and a movie. So I know this movie was in the can before these shows started, but I expect this level of filmmaking going forward from MCU movies, and I hope it doesn't drop off or whatever when comparing it to TV shows. And because you can definitely tell, you can see some seams in the TV shows. And I think WandaVision was well done.
No, wait a second. You can see some seams in the shows. Us, like regular non-broadcast engineer people, it kind of flies by until somebody like you points it out.
Okay.
It's not as noticeable to the average person. Not to make you above average or anybody below average, but I don't see it as much as you do. I don't even see it in movies as much as you do, though, but I understand what you're saying.
Well, what about the content then? I mean, like, how do you, going into this movie, you know it's going to be 2 hours long, and how do you compare it to the TV shows? Because, like, I don't expect as much out of the TV shows as I did. I want a full story out of this movie, whereas in the TV shows, you can kind of ramble a little bit.
Yeah, but I don't think they have. I thought WandaVision was near perfect. I loved everything about it. I thought everything was essential. I'm very good at not comparing or contrasting something like a TV show to a play, to a musical, to a movie. I don't do that. It's not something my brain thinks about. When I'm watching something on Netflix, if it's high quality and it comes across as high quality, I'm like, that's great. I'm watching something on Netflix. Could it have transposed to a film? I don't know. That's not how my brain works. Once I'm sucked into the story and once the characters are starting to develop and I'm starting to understand the narrative and where it's going and trying to figure out, WandaVision was half of the fun because you really didn't know what was happening in the beginning of that. And then, and then there was turn after turn after turn and spoiler after spoiler after spoiler. And then boom, you even had a bigger reveal closer to the end of that. So I like that. Could they have done that in a 2-hour movie? I don't know. But for me, I mirror everything you said about Black Widow so far. The production value is high. The character development is high. The acting is superb. There's not a glitch in that at all. Some of the performances are outstanding. I'm looking at you, Florence Pugh. Man, she's good.
Yeah.
Boy, oh boy, she takes over the movie in a sense. And that's not a slight on Scarlett Johansson. That's just the way it worked because she's just vibrant. She vibrates when she's on film. They all do. They pick the right people. And the production value is superb, and the action sequences are ridiculous. They're on the verge of almost too violent, in my opinion. Man, when she does what she does at the end of the movie, it took me out of my seat one more time. And I think it's about time we had a solo Black Widow movie, and it's a shame they could have done it before, but it's smart where they did it.
Well, yeah, and that's the other interesting thing is that, okay, so if they planned this all along, then, they totally could have slotted this in after Civil War. That's exactly where she's at the beginning of the movie. We're not getting into spoilers yet.
Oh, right,
but she's directly right after Civil War. General Ross is coming after her, and they've already caught certain people, and so she's one of the few people that's left to be caught who went against the Sokovia Accords. So, I mean, that's the time to release this movie. But it's one of those like what ifs. Like if they would have made the movie, then Florence Pugh wouldn't have been in it because Florence Pugh wasn't necessarily a thing back then right after Civil War came out. She's only kind of come to prominence in the last 2 years because, she did Little Women, she did Midsommar, she did Fighting with My Family, which was a great movie. Have you seen that movie yet?
No, not yet. I'm sorry. You keep asking me. Yeah, I know.
It's so good.
It's so weird to see the trailer now and recognize her.
Yeah.
Because I could not have put that together before.
No. And then she also did a show by Park Chan-wook called Little Drummer Girl, which I've seen 3 episodes of. So I haven't finished it. My trial for Sundance Channel ran out, and I was like, well, okay. So I'll get back to it. But she's really good in that too. And it's like her and Alexander Skarsgård and Michael Shannon. It's just like murderer's row of people in this show. And directed and I think co-written by Park Chan-wook, who's done Stoker and he did Old Boy, and that guy's on point too. So yeah, she's only come to prominence in the last 2 years. So you wouldn't have had her. You might have had David Harbour. You might have had Rachel Weisz, but it just wouldn't have been a similar movie.
You're right. Florence Pugh wouldn't have been in it. So that to me is like, yeah, thank gosh that we had to wait, and we needed to go to the Red Room. That's all we needed. Where they placed it after Civil War, after Infinity War, wherever they placed it, it didn't matter. We needed that to be solved because that's traumatizing when you see her backstory. Which movie is that? The first Avengers or the second?
It's Avengers Age of Ultron.
That's what I thought.
Yeah.
Because that's when she starts to get hooked up with Banner.
Yep.
So we needed to go there.
And then we also get the baddie is perfectly cast in Ray Winstone. He's kind of like tailor-made to be a bad guy. So yeah, I think that the casting choices were great. Speaking of casting choices, did you know I was doing some research on this movie and on the Black Widow character and Scarlett Johansson as Black Widow? Did you know that she wasn't originally cast as Black Widow?
Yes, and I can't remember who was, but it was somebody I went,
It was Emily Blunt.
Yeah, that's right. And she got pregnant.
They said, I don't know, there was something I read, it was scheduling conflicts, but I guess maybe she got pregnant. But yeah, just thinking about Emily Blunt as Black Widow, I could see it. Obviously, it was post Edge of Tomorrow and all that stuff, but still, it's just like, I don't know. It seems like Scarlett Johansson has made the character hers, and I love me some Scarlett Johansson, so I'm not going to complain. But so yeah, let's start with this. Let's start with the title sequence. How did you handle the title sequence with Smells Like Teen Spirit?
I didn't have a problem with it.
Okay.
I didn't have a problem with it. They're going to reinvent that song over and over again because it's a monumental song in all aspects of the quality of that song. So yeah, I don't have a problem with that. No, I like things like that. I like reinterpretations of songs. I like on the nose things that are obvious, but done in an artistic way, because it is kind of an obvious choice and it is a popular song. And I think that it is a good reminder of the small little sequence in Age of Ultron that we get. It's a good reminder of all of that. So I liked it. You?
Well, I guess my whole issue is it seems that's kind of a trope that let's take a popular song, let's have a female voice it, and then let's slow it down and let's make it like
Yep.
somber. And so it felt like the easy choice. And so there's a lot of other choices they made in this movie that weren't necessarily the easy choice. And it seemed like that was like I don't know, it was like a quote unquote safe choice, even though the stuff that they were depicting behind it made sense. I mean, it made showing what was going on with these children at the same time that Dreykov was intermingling with world leaders, Jimmy Carter, Boris Yeltsin, Bill Clinton. Like, I mean, I get it. I understand. And I understand that the impact that it's supposed to have is that he's got this double life and nobody knows what he's doing, but he's an influential and there's people that he's pulling the strings for and all of that stuff. Like, I mean, I understand it, but it just seemed like compared to some of the other choices they made, it seemed a little too easy.
Yeah, but the easy choice is not necessarily the wrong choice. The easy choice could be the right choice.
Yeah.
It just is. Maybe they had a bunch of different things. Does anything come to your mind that would have been a better choice? And you're absolutely right. It is getting to be a cliche.
Yeah.
You said trope, and I agree with you. Slow it down, give it a female voice, make it almost folksy in its approach. And it goes back to Mad World from Donnie Darko. That's where it kind of all began. But that's a brilliant version of that song. And I love that album that comes from, the original version, the Tears for Fears version. And it's completely different than the Tears for Fears version. Anyway, so do you have a suggestion of what you were thinking?
I was just thinking that how many of these MCU movies have title sequences with set to a song? I don't know if there's any. I would think, Guardians of the Galaxy kind of, but it's linear to the story, whereas this is kind of like flashing, popping, and the title sequence is representing a passage of time, whereas Guardians of the Galaxy, he's just dancing around to the song and kicking aliens. So I don't know. I mean, just like off the top of my head, it's not like it's not James Bond. It's not what's the newest song or what's the song they're going to do this time for the title sequence. So it's a departure from previous MCU movies, and maybe that's what's rankling me. I don't know, but at the same time, but how do you get from point A to point B? How do you go 21 years later and tell us what's going on clearly and tell us that she's been separated from her sister without doing some sort of like extrapolated, here's a bunch of time over something. So I don't know. They were in a tough spot, I guess, but maybe it's just the music choice that I'm a little annoyed with. But either way, we got to where she was right after Civil War, and then I don't know how much more we can say before we start getting into like specific spoilers. People may be a little prickly with spoilers on MCU movies, but it made a bunch of money, not only in the theater but also on demand. So a lot of people have seen this movie in the last week, which is good for movie theaters and then bad for movie theaters, because I think it was like $60 million or something on streaming is how much it made, which is not negligible. So there could be a weird situation where they prefer putting it on streaming in the future, an MCU movie.
Well, we've talked about this before, and we talked about coming back after coronavirus and what's going to happen. And I actually think this might be a good thing. We need to bring it down. There's too many multiplexes. You can't, you go to a movie at 2:00 in the afternoon and you're in theater 19. Why are there so many movie theaters? If they just, I understand.
It's so they can play Star Wars every 30 minutes.
Absolutely. And they're playing this every 30 minutes. But maybe they need to rethink it. Not everything is going to come back the way it was. And maybe that's some kind of universal thing that we have to readjust post-COVID, or in the middle of ending COVID, or coming hopefully to an end of COVID. So maybe they need to, they didn't stop from changing from Coke to Pepsi at the theater I go to. Why they did that, I have no idea. It's the one reason I go to that theater on a Friday or Saturday night, to see a big blockbuster, because they have Coke Zero. I went there for Quiet Place 2, and I was like, wait, what? And I was like, wait, no, I know they've always had Coke Zero. What happened here? And they were like, yeah, we changed. Everybody's complaining about it. No offense to Pepsi.
Mm,
I'm just saying that people are used to certain things. So
yeah.
if they're okay with changing something significant, like your soda choice or the flavor of your popcorn, whatever it is, they have to get used to changing something and bringing it back down to maybe a reasonable scale until they can bump it back up again. Get over it.
Well, but at the same time, like I'm going to put on my tinfoil hat and say that what's to stop a company like Disney from choking out Regal and AMC and saying, you know what, we're just going to release this on Disney Plus until Regal goes to them and is like, hey, so do you guys want to buy us? And then now Disney owns all these theaters around the country, and all of a sudden they're like, hey, MCU movies every week. Come on, here we go. Come on in, guys. And I mean, it can get to the point where we're back to Fox theaters, and we're back to Paramount theaters, and we're back to the vertically integrated, completely self-contained. You can only go see Black Widow 2 at the Disney Cineplex. And now we're back to the 1940s. So I don't know.
Movies complained about DVDs, TV complained about VCRs. I mean, they're always complaining about each other, and they're
Sure.
always indicting each other in their plot lines of their shows. You know, if you went to see this play, blah, blah, blah. Well, you're indicting a play in your TV show. Shut up. You know, with all due respect, be quiet. So, okay, so we have to go to a Disney Plex to see a Disney movie. Okay, but with all due respect, I have to now go to a different theater to get my Coke product. They changed that. How come it's not Cheerwine? Or how come it's not Ginger Ale Bold, which I didn't even know they had until just recently? Why is it just Coke or Pepsi? So they limited our choices with that. So I understand what you're talking about. I just don't see it. And this is so selfish to say. It just doesn't affect me.
Well, you're talking about the march of time and you're talking about technology progressing, but that's really not what this is. This is about market forces changing, and it's about going from having competition to not having competition, because Disney has gotten to the point where they are buying things. I mean, they just bought 20th Century Fox. They just bought it, and you know, they got it for a great deal. And now they're able to do really cool things. I just saw Korg and Deadpool react
I
to
saw
the
that.
Free Guy trailer, which was great and funny, and it's really neat that they can get an MCU character and a Fox character together, you know, a mutant and an MCU character together, which they would have never been able to do a year ago. So I mean, it has fun stuff, but at the same time, once you're the person who owns everything, you're the person who has the ability to tell people how much you want them to pay for it, and exclusivity, it's the enemy of change. There's no reason to want to do more when you have the ability to say, you know, this is it. Now, the one thing that will get Disney to keep working hard to try to make good movies is that at some point people will just stop going to MCU movies. Like, that will happen. Now, it may not happen for 10 years or 20 years or whatever, but they're going to have to pivot at some point. But for right now, Black Widow, I had fun with. So do you want to get into spoilers?
Yeah.
All right. So we get to meet the family again, all grown up as the movie progresses. And I do like the way that they kind of stack characters, how there's something that keeps bringing everybody together. But at the very least, we get to see one of the main baddies in Taskmaster right off the bat in Norway. And I loved how Taskmaster mimics Black Widow before you even kind of know what that character does. Like, you don't even know their name, Taskmaster. You kind of see that the character is watching the fights from Civil War, like on the tarmac, but you don't know why or what they're doing. And then they end up meeting with Black Widow, and we get to see that. And that's good visual storytelling, in my opinion, where you see that they are doing the same thing as Black Widow, and that tracks. And then later on, when you realize that that's what the character is, you're like, oh, that totally makes sense from before. So I love that kind of stuff. And it's just solid action too. But then we get Florence Pugh. So that's the best part, I think. Well, I think just Florence Pugh and Scarlett Johansson, like, those are, how do I not sound creepy? They're both very attractive, in my opinion. And they're both good actors on top of it, which helps So it's easy to watch them on screen. That's just like my opinion, man. But so their scenes together are really cool where they're able to kind of bounce off of each other. Do you feel like Florence Pugh kind of gets the better end of the writing deal where she's able to be a little bit more quippy, whereas it seems weird coming from Black Widow? Like she's got to kind of hold down the movie, I think, a little bit more.
Yeah, I've read a few things of how they've kind of done the character of Black Widow disjustice. Is that the word? Disservice. That's what I
Yeah.
wanted to say. When the story of the family takes over and Florence Pugh shows up and then David Harbour and then
Yeah.
Rachel Weisz, you forget that this is a Black Widow movie. I don't agree with that. That's been a criticism though.
Yeah, I don't know. It just seems like everybody else kind of has more opportunities to kind of like quip and be hilarious or try to be hilarious. But I mean, David Harbour's character he's just kind of like a sad character in a funny sad character, but he's always comparing himself to Captain America, who he's never met and who is the only person he can really compare himself to. But it's just like, it's that I never made it to the majors type of a feeling. And they show very early on where he like flips over that trailer and you're like, that's not something any other normal person could do. So you know right off the bat something's going on with this guy.
Well, see, this is why that's a good example of why I don't think that Scarlett Johansson is wasted in this movie, because anybody in that same situation, when he starts going, hey, did you ever mention me to Captain America? And she's like, you haven't seen me in 20 years and you want to talk about Captain America? What? Without the way Scarlett Johansson does that line reading, you wouldn't have a movie and it wouldn't be funny. It would be awkward and weird, which it is, but it is hilarious because she plays the straight person. And so you need that. You need that grounding. And that great sequence where Florence Pugh asks her, why do you always do that, with the way that she poses and starts calling her a pose.
Here it is.
Why do you always do that thing?
Do what?
The thing you do when you're fighting. And this thing that you do when you whip your hair when you're fighting with the arm and the hair, and you do like a fighting pose. It's a fighting pose. You're a total poser.
I'm not a poser.
Oh, come on. I mean, they're great poses, but it does look like you think everyone's looking at you like all the time.
All that time that I spent posing, I was trying to actually do something good.
Yeah, her reaction though is what makes that work. And she goes from feeling like dejected and innocent, like, wait, I'm not really doing that on purpose, am I? And the whole, that split, I mean, it's maybe 10 seconds of a reaction on her face right after those last couple of lines. And it's endearing and you relate to it because she is just trying, you've come to know that pose. And so for somebody to point it out, you know, it's almost meta in a way. And the way that I want to know, I would love to see that on the page because I wonder how that line was written.
Well,
because
there's a story behind that actually. So
there is?
Yeah. So the writer was on set and Florence Pugh was actually kind of like joking because she's new to the MCU and she's new to superheroes and all that stuff. So the writer, Eric Pearson, was on set and he heard them kind of going back and forth, or just heard Florence Pugh razzing Scarlett Johansson, and he went up to them and he was like, "Hey guys, this is actually really funny, so I'm gonna kind of take this and run with it." And he did write those words. He wrote the actual dialogue to kind of codify what they were talking about. But I think that Florence Pugh brings it home by when she gets down in that pose, she kind of like groans, and as she gets up, she kind of groans, and it's perfect because like you just saw both of them kick ass in this last scene, and now it's like all of a sudden she's like, come on, this is not even doable. Like nobody would actually do this in real life. It's so difficult to even get into the shape, but she doesn't have to say that. Like you can tell in her how she vocalizes while she's getting down and getting up, and it's just perfect.
Well, also she does a little bit of a flip with the hair, but she does it a couple of times to try to get the pose right. Because at first she's like, nope, yep, there it is. And that's what makes it funny. And I love the fact that that's something she was actually saying, because you can feel the organic realness to that scene. You can just feel it. And so I would like to see it on paper, because I'm wondering how much was there added things in there at the last moment, because it just seems so natural. And Florence Pugh is that kind of actress. I believe she could pull that off even if it was word perfect. But it's Scarlett Johansson that lands that plane. It's the whole like we just went through all of that, and that's what you're gonna. I'm a big hero. I'm on Time magazine, which gets joked about later on too. And that's nothing that Scarlett Johansson says in that scene, but it's all written all over her face. And so, yes, I laughed out loud, like very loud. Luckily, there's only about 5 people in the theater, but I do that. And I kept laughing. And then after Scarlett Johansson's reaction, I laughed again as big as I laughed when she went down to the ground, because it's just very human. And her reaction lands that whole scene for me.
The cool part is that they just keep stacking. So they're stacking her and Florence Pugh, and then they go and you have another set piece, another action set piece, which is breaking the dad out of the prison, breaking Red Guardian out of the prison, and then you get to go see the mom too. And so we just keep building. And actually, I've seen it twice now, and as I watched it the second time, it didn't feel as much like we were moving from set piece to set piece. It felt like it was a more natural progression, which I think is good, because you can definitely get into that mode of, we haven't had any action for 2 minutes, so we need something. And then you end with the most epic of all of the action scenes, literally skydiving without a parachute and fighting in midair on solar panels. You can't necessarily top that. Did you see the Moonraker little Easter egg they had in there, where she's in Norway and she's eating her dinner and she's watching Moonraker, the James Bond movie, on her laptop? And in Moonraker, there's a hidden fortress in the sky that's like cloaked, and it's very similar to what the Red Room is. I mean, for a different reason, but it's very similar to what the Red Room is in this movie. So it's kind of like a hint, I guess, for people who really want to like look into that. And it's James Bond, which is neat, and you get to hear Scarlett Johansson try to imitate Roger Moore, which is also fun. All right. Did you ever feel like there was a chance that Rachel Weisz wasn't gonna like stick with the family, or okay?
No, I thought that's why the opening sequence was so well done. First of all, the opening sequence, they keep reinventing car chases in Hollywood, and they keep getting it right. You would think that trope would be dead, because we see it, especially anything with Mission Impossible. Once they've done it in Mission Impossible, you can't top it. But that motorcycle sequence is that the last Mission Impossible? That's incredible. So they topped themselves. And it's simple, but also very well done. That whole car chase sequence in the airplane and all that stuff is extremely well done. No, I think that the whole purpose of showing the family obviously is to show that they're spies and they're undercover and all that other stuff, and that they were a fake family and so forth and so on. But you can see the love there. When she pulls him to the side, she doesn't become a double agent.
Yeah, and they don't speak in Russian either, which I thought was interesting.
No, they don't. They speak like mother and father talking about Christmas gifts that they don't want their kids to overhear. And that's endearing. So I would have not liked it if they had, first of all, I love Rachel Weisz. So to turn her into a bad guy when you're not expecting it, I would have been like, I don't think you needed that twist. You don't need the twist. You don't need a twist. You do get a twist later on, but that's about the bad guy. And that's makes sense. So no, I wouldn't have liked it, and I'm glad they didn't do it, and I don't think they should have.
Well, and they also kind of tipped their hand by showing that that Rachel Weisz kept the photo album. And it's kind of like, okay, if somebody who keeps a photo album is not going to just sell their previous family down the river that quickly.
A photo album that she told her not to take with them. She ended up taking it anyway. And that's for a significant reason in the movie later on, where she's talking about that. Why would you remember when we filmed that? So actually, even though they were filming, taking pictures of fake holidays, they still had a bonding moment. They had a bonding holiday moment. And so it was nice. And so I don't think you needed it.
Yeah.
I don't think you needed a twist like that.
So what about the level of humor in this film, because we've had movies that have been just like more kind of like straightforward movies, even something like Captain America Winter Soldier. I mean, it's somewhat dry when you think about it compared to something like Thor Ragnarok. I mean, they're just two totally different levels of humor, but they're both MCU movies and they both fit within a whole. And it seemed like this movie for me was trying to walk that line, and I felt like it did an okay job. There were a lot of times I think that David Harbour was really chewing the scenery, but it wasn't too out of place, and there were enough times that were, like you said, laugh out loud type of times, but it didn't seem like they overreached too much.
And I thought a lot of the humor was significant to the character development, because when he says to them in the car, when they have the conversation about their time of the month, that's such a
in the
cliche
helicopter?
thing for.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, that's right. There was a helicopter. Right. That's such a cliche, misogynistic thing for a man to say to a woman in a movie. It's so cliche at this point. So the humanness of it was when Florence Pugh just factually checked him with why that wasn't a possibility. Not only is it a stereotype and it is a misogynistic view about women, but we can't possibly have our period because blah, 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 blah.
Here, I'm going to play it.
Okay, good.
Why the aggression, huh? Is it your time of the month?
I don't get my period, dipshit. I don't have a uterus.
Or ovaries.
Yeah, that's what happens when the Red Room gives you an involuntary hysterectomy. They kind of just go in and they rip out all of your reproductive organs. They just get right in there and they chop them all away. Everything out.
Okay.
So you can't have
Okay, you
babies.
don't have to get so clinical and nasty.
Oh, well, I'm about to talk about fallopian tubes, but okay.
See, I laughed out loud and then I instantaneously felt bad because I didn't want to be seen as disrespectful to women, but it was a laugh out loud, putting
It's
somebody in
supposed
their
to be.
place.
Yeah.
Yeah, it really, well, I mean, it's a touchy thing. It's a touchy subject. So you just have to be careful of how you come across, or at least, I mean, I couldn't help it. I laughed out loud, but it also reminds you of what's at stake. See, that's why the humor doesn't bother me in this movie, because I did notice it is a very quippy film and Florence Pugh is she's a quip master.
The part that sells that whole scene to me is what she does with her hands. She just, I know this is a podcast, but she just like shoves her hands up and it's just, it's kind of, I don't know, it's somehow creepy, but also funny. Like she's just like, you know what? They just like get all up in there and she's just like shoving her hands up and you're just like, you can imagine what pain that could cause and just the not only the physical pain, but also the emotional pain and what that means for these girls. You're right. It's trying to point out how absurd what he's talking about is and how absurd the situation that they have been in for their whole life is.
Well, for me, it's if they were going to do another sequence like they did in Age of Ultron, it would become borderline maudlin and melodramatic. It would drain us. So we need to be reminded why we need to take down the Red Room. The best way to do that is to have some ignorant guy say some ignorant stuff and have him reminded by the master of the quip. So for me, it was a reminder. But if you had to see that sequence again or something similar to that, first of all, it would be a retread of that. It's a great way to emphasize why we're in this movie to begin with, without it becoming melodramatic and just too dark to handle, because there are dark moments in this movie, but they don't suffocate the film, and they could. So I'm glad they didn't do that. I'm glad that, because sometimes facing reality, and when somebody just tells somebody the truth that they have no idea is the reality of the situation, and then they just remind them, and he's got to know, David Harbour's character, the Red Guardian, has to know something about this. He is a secret agent for this guy.
You're right, because he's gonna have a certain level of remove. He's gonna be like, oh yeah, Dreykov is a guy who does some things to some girls, but I don't really see it, and so I'm just Red Guardian, and And that's what I'm here for. And that's separate from all this other stuff. But he's confronted with the reality of what's going on by these girls who grew up in front of him for 3 years. And now he's having to confront the truth of that, of what he was complicit in.
And the other thing that it does is it makes a statement about how women are treated in the real world without it becoming a soapbox issue.
Yeah.
It plants it somewhere in your brain. If you're not aware that this actually does happen in some countries on some level, and if you're not aware of that, it plants it somewhere. And so when you see that news story, you see that Facebook meme or feed or whatever, or that story about how it does happen to young women in places in this world, all of a sudden it's in there, and it's a lot easier to accept it and then hopefully mature and make sure your world doesn't allow that to happen. There I go. I'm getting on my soapbox, but it's a great way to do it without getting on a soapbox.
Well, and it also kind of points out the fact that we've seen Black Widow starting in Iron Man 2, and we've known a little bit about her character, a lot more from Avengers Age of Ultron on, but really we are also as an audience confronted with what she's been going through for her whole adult life. Well, pretty much since she was able to get out of the Black Widow group. And so that is forcing us to try to understand what she's been going through in the background the whole time when she's been trying to save the world and help out everyone else and lead the Avengers. And on top of that, she's having to deal with the fact that up until this point, chronologically in the MCU, she knows that there are a bunch of girls that are against their will being forced to be elite assassins. So it's just like, wow, that's a lot to handle. And then also have to go get Tony Stark tea. So that's difficult. But yeah, so this probably should have happened earlier, and there's obviously a lot of backstory for her to where it makes it seem a little bit harder to explain away why an original Avenger didn't get their own movie until this point. But it just seems like they had a bunch of stuff planned out, and Black Widow's story didn't lay neatly in there, and so they had to deal with that.
I actually think that that's a smart move, because they keep saying it's about time that they made a Black Widow movie, but I actually think that if it came before now, it might not have been appreciated as much. Now that we know what her end game is, see what I did there?
Yeah.
That it is, I mean, we love that character, so to actually see her again is fulfilling, but also she's filling in the subplot that we talked about earlier with the Red Room, and how that needs to be tied up, and that storyline needs to end. And so if they had done it after Civil War, would we have cared as much? I don't know. I mean, now that we know what happens to her, maybe we're that much more endeared to her that this just rings more true. I don't know. I think it was smart because it also would have seemed like a cash grab. That's a term you always use. That we're just making another Avengers movie, but with a solo movie, we have to have something with Black Widow. But would that have served the MCU Avengers universe? Because this is a completely separate story that has nothing to do with the Avengers. Nothing at all. If you think about it.
So is Ant-Man.
Yes, but he becomes a significant character to the Avengers. She's already been a significant character to the Avengers.
Yeah.
So do we need a backstory in the middle of the whole Age of Ultron, Endgame, Infinity War, Captain Marvel? She needed a solo movie to introduce herself to the MCU and make her, same with Spider-Man. They needed solo movies in order to interject them into this world. So she's already part of this world, a significant part of this world. I think it's placed perfectly. I think it's perfect timing for it also.
Well, yeah, I mean, I do. Yeah, you're right. It is nice to be able to have essentially an encore for this character. And so that right there is kind of fun. And I'm sure that Scarlett Johansson is happily, going to move on, but still is able to have a last hurrah and be the star of her last hurrah. I mean, just quickly, Olga Kurylenko, who is a Bond girl, which is really awesome. So James Bond comes back in this movie. She was the main Bond girl, I guess, in Quantum of Solace. So what you were saying earlier, the kind of switcheroo, how even the main characters in the film are calling Taskmaster him, and he does this and he does that.
Yeah.
And that's just a
I knew it was coming.
misdirection. Yeah.
Yeah, I knew it was coming. There was something about it just made me go, they hit it very well. She definitely does not come across as male or female per se, but I was like, there's something about this. I just knew it.
Yeah.
You know, it just makes sense.
Yeah.
After seeing all the movies we see.
Yeah. And then you have like a supermodel essentially, and they do some crazy stuff to her face. And it's like, okay, well, she's still pretty, but still they did some crazy.
Her eyes are beautiful.
Yeah. But then the way that they were able to like, they probably used some CGI to kind of like remove some of her eyelid and kind of make it a little bit more exposed, make the eyeball a little bit more exposed, which I thought was cool. And that's the kind of stuff that, just as long as it's not the mouth, and she did never talk, so they didn't have to worry about that. Just as long as it's not the mouth, they can really do a lot with CGI, face augmenting, and it looks photorealistic. Like you cannot tell a difference between real life and CGI. And that's the kind of stuff that is really impressive to me. And then, you know, Ray Winstone, her dad, not so great of a character, but he gets his comeuppance. What about the whole like breaking her nose and all that stuff? That's pretty.
That's what I was talking about earlier.
Hardcore. Yeah.
Well, but the whole movie is hardcore.
Yeah.
The some of the action sequences borderline on too violent for me, and I'm never like that. I'm always about crashing stuff and blowing things up, and you know, violence in the movies versus violence in real life. That's a whole nother discussion. But I'm always willing to see things blow up because that's what we're expecting in these movies. I was not expecting the movie to be as brutal as it was, because it's brutal in places. And that just is the cherry on the sundae of brutality in this movie. Because when she does that, because you're trying to connect the dots when you're watching it. You're like, okay, they said that, they said this, they said break the nerve, they said all of these things, and it goes into your brain, but you're not really sure how it's going to come back out in the movie. And then I thought for some reason in my head, I thought she had to break his nose. I don't know why, for whatever reason, when I was trying to figure it all out. And then when right a split second before she does it, I was like, is she going to entice him into beating her up? Because we've seen that in other movies. And I was like, I don't like that whole idea of abuse against women just for abuse against women thing. What are they going to do here? And then she slams her head. And I was like, oh my. I turned to my dad and I go, geez, Louise, like, what is happening here? And he was like, that was brutal.
Yeah.
And I was like, yes, it was. So I think she does what she needs to do to solve the problem.
Well,
and that's the character we've always gotten.
Yeah, and it also shows the absolute weakness of that Dreykov character is that he only feels comfortable beating up a woman who he knows can't fight back. And he's physically preventing her from fighting back. It's not that she doesn't have the physical capabilities of competing against him. It's that she is repulsed, a la A Clockwork Orange. To the point where I leaned over to Steph and I was like, this is A Clockwork Orange. And so she was like, oh, that's gross. She was just like, that's some messed up stuff right there. And I was like, yep. So, but yeah, it did give me those vibes, but she figured out a way around it. And then, like I said earlier, I mean, that whole set piece of everything kind of falling apart and the Red Room breaking down and them saving all of the widows, but then that whole Taskmaster Black Widow fight in midair is great. And the fact that it's so high up, you can expect there to be that much of a drop. Like, cause I think that fight was probably like, I don't know, 2 minutes long or 3 minutes long. The crazy part is you could probably free fall for 2 to 3 minutes. Like if you're that high, which is kind of cool. Now, I don't know if you'd be able to breathe at that height, but whatever. So it's still a really cool kind of like ticking clock. It's like a bomb. I mean, it's like a bomb is going to go off. It's just a bomb isn't going to go off. You're going to hit the ground and die. You need to get done whatever you're going to get done before you hit the ground. So that was kind of cool. And of course, she saves Florence Pugh by giving her the parachute instead of taking it herself or whatever. And then she goes and kicks Taskmaster's butt.
Yeah, she jumps off to save Florence Pugh.
Yep.
Yeah, it's all well done. Speaking of which, we have not said the director's name yet.
Kate Shortland.
Shortland.
Yeah, she's Australian.
She did it up right. Those action sequences are some of the best I've seen. Like I've said 1,000 times already, they're brutal. They don't pull any punches, no pun intended. They are sharp. And sometimes action sequences are so bombastic, you actually forget the logistics of them because they're so over the top. They're very clear. I go back to the very opening sequence again because it's so clear what's happening and you never get lost in it. You could get lost in some of those cars blowing up in that plane and all that other stuff, and David Harbour on the wing of the plane and all this other stuff. You could get lost in it and you don't. It's very clear. And she has a steady hand on directing action sequences. So I'm hoping that she's the kind of director, because I was looking up her bio. I don't know much about her. I'm hoping she's the kind of director that goes on to do other things. But if she needs to be a gun for hire for something else like this, they should hire her because she's got it down. And then you were talking about the family moments and the tone of it. Sometimes those moments just connect those big set pieces. But they were as significant to me. That scene when they're eating dinner, when they finally get away, her and Florence Pugh finally get away. And that's one of the best acted scenes in an MCU movie, in my opinion. It's very well done. But you could get bogged down in that. It could slow the movie down. And that scene was just as exciting to me as anything else that blew up. So bravo.
Yeah, no, you're right. I mean, she's done, Kate Shortland's done a few feature films, and she also just got off of directing SMILF, SMILF show that I heard a little bit about a couple of years ago. She's worked with a lot of good actors. She's worked with Teresa Palmer, who's Australian. She's worked with Abby Cornish, who's also Australian. So she's worked with some good actors, and from what it seems like, is able to get what she needs out of them. So that's great. So once the movie's over and everybody's living happily ever after, she gets that like Quinjet. I guess she's going to go pick up Captain America and then go free all the rest of the people, which is the beginning of Infinity War. We also get to see her get the vest from Florence Pugh, which is great.
I love that.
I didn't pick up that was the vest that she was wearing in Infinity War, but when she gives it to him, I'm like, oh my gosh, it is the vest.
I didn't pick it up until she had the blonde hair and was walking with it on.
Yeah.
And I went, oh, it's clever. That whole sequence is clever, but it's got all these pockets.
Yes. Oh man. Florence Pugh, she just knows how to sell those lines. Yeah.
She is something.
We get all of that, and then the credits, and then after credits scene where it's post Endgame. It's got to be pretty close to the end of Endgame because it seems like there's the stuff around Natasha's grave is fresh or new, and so that's when we get to see the Julie Louis-Dreyfus character in what was planned to be the first time you see the character, but ends up being the second time we've seen it. Have you seen that?
No, I heard about it though.
Oh, so you've been ruined, I guess. But
no, not really. And I feel a lot better knowing now that she was supposed to be in this first and that second. So, I mean, you cannot go on social media and not hear these things unless you go on a blackout. And I don't do that often. I've done it for a couple of shows. Sons of Anarchy, the last season, I blacked out everything. I didn't want to know nothing. And I went the whole year without knowing anything before it came out on DVD. So no, I didn't know anything about it. But I'll tell you, that end sequence is smart, and it kind of sums up how the MCU does it right. You introduce a new character, okay, at least a new character to everybody who's not seen Falcon and the Winter Soldier. You finally give Black Widow her funeral, which was a criticism of Endgame, rightfully so. She's a main character, and they didn't even do anything to her. They have that one little scene at the end where they're looking out into the river and they mention her.
And Hulk throws a bench.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's his reaction to her dying. Not like Tony Stark gets a big funeral, which he should have. But there was a lot of criticism that Natasha didn't have even a tombstone. Now she does. Mm-hmm. And you're introducing what possibly could be Phase 4's Black Widow.
Yep.
So brilliant. Well done.
Yeah.
Worth it.
So now there's a couple of theories out there. One theory is that Yelena, Florence Pugh's character, will become a part of the Dark Avengers, which is kind of like the other side of the coin of the Avengers, kind of like the bad guys. And when you see her, I don't know how much you want me to say about Falcon Winter Soldier, but
Yeah, don't say anything.
okay. When you see who she interacts with, you may see why that may hold a little bit more sway and why people may be talking about that. But there's a chance that she may be kind of so turned off about the whole superhero thing or the whole system thing where she maybe wants to go underground or may want to go in a different direction. And just the fact that she lost her sister in the way that she did, and that her sister was, even though it was her sister's choice, just the fact that her sister being a part of the Avengers took Natasha away from Yelena, maybe something that
After she got her back.
yeah, exactly, might be something that pushes her away from being an Avenger. So it just depends. She could totally be an Avenger, and it'd be great if she's an Avenger, it'd be awesome. But there's also another track where she could be a bad Avenger or a bad guy. That might be interesting too. It may also be one of those things where it's like, Hawkeye gets all crazy eyed by Loki, and then all of a sudden he's like, oh, look, I'm a good guy again. So, it's like that was kind of a have your cake and eat it too. It's like, we need bad guys. Oh, but then we need good guys. So now Hawkeye can be a bad guy and he can be a good guy. And so that's what they ended up doing in Thor.
I liked it.
Yeah.
The way that it's being sold is that she's going to be on a revengeful narrative, because the way that Julie Louis-Dreyfus is selling it, do you want to see the person who killed your sister?
Yeah.
That's not what happened. He didn't.
Of course.
He tried to save her.
Yes.
He tried to save her. So she's being manipulated in that way. So, but there's also talk that with the new Hawkeye series that's coming out, his daughter's in it, and they're the younger Avengers. There's always there's a whole cartoon about the young Avengers. They're children of the Avengers mostly. I can't remember who Hawkeye's kid is, but Hawkeye hooks up with somebody super, and the kid ends up with powers, if I remember correctly.
In the show, it's going to be Haley Steinfeld, who I think is just an supposed to be a grown-up version of his daughter.
And you got Tony Stark's daughter growing up, and you got the kid who was in Iron Man growing up. I mean, you got all these people.
And then Spider-Man's going to kind of be like the head of them, maybe? I don't know. It's because he's young enough.
Makes sense.
Yeah. And then they've got the kids in WandaVision, too.
Oh, yeah.
They'll be in it, too, because those are characters. Yeah. It's one of those things, we'll see if they can, spin it out and keep everybody interested. But I think that Black Widow was a good entry, and it definitely was deserving in the the MCU canon. And like I said, I've already watched it twice in the last 3 days. So yeah.
Well, that's what I'm going to end with. The feeling of wanting to see it again, especially after you've just seen it, is strong for me. I can't wait to see it again. I don't know if I'll go back to the theaters to see it again. I don't know if I'll see it on pay-per-view, whatever. But I can't wait to see it again. There's been a few in the MCU that I've been like, oh, I'll wait to see that again. Yeah, I'm okay. Civil War, I can't not see that film. I keep watching it over and over again. I think I've seen that one the most. I'm pretty sure. But when Black Widow ended, it was racing through my mind, everything. And of course, that we do a podcast, I'm trying to put things together and categorize and all that other stuff. And then finally at the end, I was like, it was all clear and I remember it all, but I couldn't wait to see it again. There are things I can't wait to actually hone in on, because it's very explosive in places. And, I want to see the small minor details. A few things that you pointed out earlier on in the podcast, I was like, oh no, I don't think I would have noticed that on first view. So can't wait. So that's always a good thing for me.
No, that's great. Well, you can check us out on the web at actorandengineer.com. You can tweet us at actorengineer. We're on Facebook at facebook.com/actorandengineer. And you can find us on YouTube. Just search for Actor and Engineer Podcast. And we'll see you next time.